Good morning. I'm one of those people who hates conflict. If I could craft the perfect life, there would be no conflict, everybody would get along. I just kind of want to run the other way, which is a problem if you're also a person who's called to be married. Marriage involves a lot of conflict. I'll often begin my sacred marriage seminars talking about how that has to be one of the first things singles look for, somebody that knows how to handle conflict in a healthy way, because I warn them, marriage, as much as anything, makes you angry. It was a shock for me as a new husband, particularly when my wife would wake up furious at me for how I treated her in her dreams the night before. But you were asleep, it doesn't matter, you were such a jerk. I'm like, sorry? And you know what? It's passed down to the next generation. I just got back from a 2-week trip this week. I was talking to my oldest daughter, catching up. And she says, Dad, I gotta tell you, you and I had a big fight when you were gone. I said, really? She goes, yeah, I had a dream and I was yelling at you for an hour and I'm so sorry. Allison's IQ is off the chart. She's always taking the sensitive side of the person who's aggrieved. She goes, you were divorcing Mom and she was crying and I was so mad, I was just yelling at you. I said, honey, I'm proud of you if you were yelling at me. If I divorced someone like your mother, I deserve to be yelled at. It's good for standing up. And she goes, well, that wasn't your attitude in the dream. What was my attitude in the dream? She goes, you were saying, it's no big deal, honey. I'm writing a book, Sacred Divorce. It's gonna all be okay. I'm not making this up. I couldn't. My wife heard the call. It's just crazy. And I thought first, there's something about me that gets the family members angry at me even when I'm not there. But I'm not a fan of conflict. But here's the thing I want to present at the very start of this. The quality of your marriage is directly related to your ability to handle conflict in a mature and spiritually profitable way. Let me say that again, if we could bring up the slide. The quality of your marriage is directly related to your ability to handle conflict in a mature and spiritually fruitful way, which means singles, you really should make somebody's ability to handle conflict in a positive as opposed to negative way one of the first things you're looking for when you're considering marrying someone. And it's not just about marriage, it's about work relationships. How many of us aren't able to continue in a workplace we really enjoy because the relationships are so whacked out, so full of conflict that we just give up and say, I kind of like the work I'm doing, I hate the people I'm doing it with, and we let conflict push us away from something that could actually be very meaningful work. Because the challenge is too many of us treat relationships like we treat iPhones. One of the things I love most about a brand new iPhone, it's not all the new gizmos and gadgets because I don't use 95% of them. What I love about a new iPhone is the battery. Isn't it just glorious? You charge it up in the morning, you don't even think about it the rest of the day, and then 6 months later, you're having to plug it in the evening before you go home, not that big a deal. After about a year and a half or so, you're plugging it in the morning, you're plugging it in the evening. Last couple months, you just leave it plugged in the whole time, and you just can't wait until that 2-year contract is up and you finally get a new phone. And we kind of do that with our relationships. It's sort of our pattern, whether it's because you're infatuated with someone romantically, whether you have a roommate where you guys are really clicking, whether you have a workplace where you really enjoy what you're doing. That just sort of carries us. We're just charged, you're energized, you're excited about where you are and everything around you. And then things start to happen and the relationship gets drained and it seems to get worse and worse and worse until finally after 2 years, just give me a new phone. Give me a new dating partner. Give me a new place to work. Give me a new spouse. I'm just done with this one. And the reason we do that is because relationships aren't easy. They're one of the best things in life, but they're not easy. And the Bible tells us why. James 3:2 tells us we all stumble in many ways. We all stumble in many ways. We mess up, all of us. You can't find somebody to be in a relationship with that doesn't mess up. That's why relationships are so difficult. If I was titling this sermon, I'm not sure I would have done this, but I would have been tempted to title it, How Do Porcupines Mate? Think about it. Not too hard, but just in general, how do porcupines mate? I'm actually gonna tell you a little bit later on, but we're gonna hold it for now. But let me just say this in general. It's not easy, it's scary, but they do it, all right? How do people who stumble in many ways stay in workplaces, marriages, and as roommates? It's not easy. It's scary, but it's possible. The Apostle Paul gives us some great wisdom on this in the book of Ephesians chapter 4, and that's what we're going to begin today, beginning with verse 1. Ephesians chapter 4, beginning with verse 1, and Paul begins with this. Live a life worthy of the calling you have received. Well, Paul is saying you've been called God's son or God's daughter, just as we sang. You've been given the Holy Spirit. You've been given forgiveness. You've got everything going for you. And so there's a certain life you should live that is worthy of all that God has given you. And when I was a younger man, when I was a younger Christian, I would have expected Paul to say, therefore, don't do this, don't do that, avoid that, don't look at this, don't say these words, don't ingest that. I would have been waiting for Paul to say all of the pietistic things that we think a Christian is all about. But Paul doesn't do any of that. When Paul says, live a life worthy of the calling you've received, everything he mentions is relational. Everything he calls us to do refers to how we treat other people. He says, be completely humble. Well, I can't be humble unless it's relation to other people. And gentle. Well, I have to be gentle around other people. Be patient. The only way I can be patient is if somebody's getting on my nerves. Be bearing with one another in love. Well, that means that they're really making it difficult for me. I don't have to just enjoy them in love. It says bear with one another in love. Make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. Again, it's not easy. He's saying you're going to have to make every effort. It's hard and it's scary. But what this passage tells me is this. Your ability to cherish your spouse and get along with others in the workplace when they stumble is in fact a direct thermometer of your spiritual maturity. That's what tells you how far you are in the Lord. A holy person isn't known by what words they don't say or what they eat or don't eat or don't drink or how many religious meetings they go to. A holy person is known by how he or she treats fellow sinners. So you know you are a strong person spiritually when you can live joyfully and gracefully around spiritually weak people. You know you're a strong person spiritually when you can live joyfully and gracefully around spiritually weak people. That's what determines your faith, and it's all about how you handle conflict. That's the big picture, so let's get into this. What does it mean when Paul says to be humble, to say be completely humble? It means you would never look at yourself as better than your spouse. You don't look at your day as more important than theirs. If it matters to them, it should matter to you. I mentioned Lisa and I just got back from being away for 2 weeks, and we had a busy week ahead because Lisa knew I was preaching today, and then my publisher knew I was away and had all these deadlines. Well, now that you're back, hope you had a good time, but now we need this, this, and this. But then we had Wednesday morning, one of those things where a repairman comes in and they say he'll be there between 8 and noon, which means they always arrive at 11:59. Have you ever caught that? And so I was eager for a good start. Lisa had her Bible study in the morning. I said, look, honey, I can just work at home. It's no big deal. She goes, no, I want you to get a good start. I know you've got a lot to do. I'll be home. I don't want you to have to be hassled. No, I really want to do it. I called her 2 or 3 times. She rejected it every time. We're kind of fighting over whose day is more important. Now, that's 30 years in a marriage. It would have been very different, I think, 3 years into our marriage, but we've learned that if it matters to each other, it should matter to us. It is arrogant to think my day and my concerns are ever more important than my spouse's. Paul says that's how you handle conflict. That's what it means to live a life worthy of the calling you've received. You celebrate, you support what the other person is doing. That's the practical definition of humility. And then he says, be completely gentle, not a little bit gentle, but to be completely gentle. That means you don't respond harshly to your spouse's sin. You watch your tone, you watch your attitude, you really watch your touch. You treat your spouse as if they can be hurt easily, not because they're fragile, but just because all of us can. We all are easily wounded. Now, let me say something in particular to the guys, because I think I would be remiss to talk about conflict in marriage without bringing this up. Paul deals with this in another place, Colossians 3:19, when he says this to husbands, husbands, love your wives and never treat them harshly. This doesn't matter if you're really tired, if you've had a long day, if they really frustrate you, if they forgot to do something they would say you do. He says, be completely gentle, and elsewhere, never treat them harshly, which means men, my brothers in Christ, domestic violence, verbal abuse, emotional abuse should be unthinkable among God's people. We're told to live a life worthy of the calling we've received. We are never to be harsh towards God's daughters. So just in case there's any uncertainty about that, men, I want you to answer, when may we be harsh with our wives? Never. We're to be completely gentle. And then Paul says we're to be patient. You don't expect your spouse to be perfect. You know they're going to mess up. You don't lie in wait for them to fall again and then pounce when they do with a ready-made, sermon to throw their way. You realize it's just part of living around each other. You're going to let each other down. Back when Lisa and I lived out in Katy, and we were way out in Katy. We were out 1463 at a development called Firethorn. And it wasn't that bad when we moved out there 5 or 6 years ago. If there was no traffic, I could leave the front door of my house. I could be at this church campus in about 28 minutes. That's not a bad commute. But the developers kept building, and they added stoplights, and cars kept backing up on I-10. And so after about 6 months or so, when I first got there, if I left by 6 a.m., I'm doing okay. After about 6 months, I had to leave by 5:45 a.m. to beat the traffic. After about 1.5 years, 2 years, I had to leave by 5:30. And by the time I left, if I wasn't on the road by 5:15, I paid the price. I'm just sitting in traffic. And one morning I slept in a little bit too late. It was 4:45, 4:50 or something. Man, I gotta get going. I could feel the traffic backing up, so I go through the shaving routine and get dressed and gather everything together. And I knew I was way behind. I figured the traffic is already backed up on I-10 about to that Buc-ee's just outside of San Antonio. So this is gonna be a long drive. And then I couldn't find my keys. I always put my keys in 1 or 2 places, but they just weren't there. And so I'm looking in my pants pockets. I'm checking. I can't find them anywhere. I'm panicking. I take out my cell phone, and I'm looking around the room, and that kind of stirs Lisa. And she wakes up. She goes, "What's the matter?" I said, "I can't find my keys." She goes, "Oh. See, I couldn't find my keys last night, and so I had to borrow your car." "Oh, where'd you put them?" She hadn't had her coffee yet. It would have been my purse. Great, we got your purse. Where's your purse? So she gets up and she helps me. We finally find it, and she is apologized. She knows. She doesn't need to be told what this means for me. She knows how it's putting me out. She knows my obsession. She knows everything. She goes, "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." I said, "Honey, it's okay. I get it. You didn't mean to do this." And I got to tell you, when I was a younger husband, I would make sure she knew just how put out I was. I'd make sure she knew just how frustrated I was and what this meant. But she already knew that. It would have been pointless. She didn't do it intentionally. It's just those things in marriage that happens. And so if you treat each other with gentleness and patience, some conflicts you realize shouldn't be conflict at all. There was nothing to resolve. She didn't intend to do it. See, when I was a stupider, it's not a word, but when I was a stupider younger husband, I was a master at fantasy fights. Any of you do that? Please don't do that. It's a fantasy fight with your spouse, and they're not even there. And the whole problem with the fantasy fight is you think what needs to resolve the conflict is that your spouse needs to hear your opinion. We're gonna find out conflict isn't about winning, it's about understanding. It's about hearing what your spouse has to say, and my spouse never talked back in my fantasy fights, right? It was just me finding the right things, but patience undercuts fantasy fights. He says that's not the appropriate way to handle conflict. And then Paul says to bear with one another in love. It means you master the art of dealing with the worst part of your spouse's personality in the best sort of way. Now, my wife has mastered this. my OCD-ish kind of stuff. I mean, she just knows how to handle me. She's learned to bear up and say, this is the price I pay for being married to Gary. She's got it. She manages it. And I think that says a lot about our marriage as much as anything. And so it's what I try to do when I'm preparing couples to get married. I had one couple in pre-marriage counseling where she got what she liked to call hangry. You know what hangry is? When you get really hungry and then you're really angry, right? Now, some of you have never been hangry because you can go 12 hours without eating. It doesn't affect you. If you're excited about something, you don't. But if you get hangry, it's a big deal, all right? It takes over everything. And her future husband didn't know what it was like to be hangry, had never been hangry in his life. And so, those early days of dating, she's trying to be nice and polite. She doesn't want to act like she just really needs food. So just say, I'm kind of getting hungry. And so he would take it as, okay, in the next 3 or 4 hours, we should probably go out to eat. And that wasn't quite good enough. And so she'd put up with misery for an hour. I really need to eat. And then he'd say, oh, okay. Then he would get out his phone and go on Yelp and look at 20 reviews of 15 different restaurants. Well, this is a 4.2 star. This is a 3. And it was just causing all this conflict. And I looked at him, I said, look, I tried to describe what hangry is. I said, if you want to marry her, if you want to have a good marriage, here's what happens. When she gets hangry, feed her. All right, just feed her, all right? This is not the time to stop for an errand along the way. It's not time to fill up your gas tank. It's not time to get into an argument. Either give her a protein bar that you have and the side handle, take her to a restaurant. Yelp is not your friend, all right? The closest restaurant is your friend. Just feed her. Now, you may not get hangry. Maybe you're insecure. Maybe it's an issue of lack of respect. You've got to know, if you want to be forbearing with your spouse, with your boss, with your roommate, you've got to know what pushes their buttons. And part of living according to my call is figuring out how I manage that in a way that builds them up. So we make every effort, he says, to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace, which means it's work. Every effort. Relationships just don't happen automatically. And this is so key. I want to put it up here so you could read it while I say it because it's a very key point. The Bible never pretends that Christian communities or marriages are successful because the members are saints or sinless or close to perfect. No, the relationships become successful only when we apply grace to each other's imperfections. We make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. It's hard, it takes effort, but it's possible. So here's what I want to throw out. It's not compatibility that determines whether you're going to have a great marriage. That's what most singles think. It's not compatibility that determines whether you're going to have a great marriage. It's not the level of your feelings. What determines whether you're going to be able to have a lifelong marriage with somebody who, according to James 3:2, stumbles in many ways is whether you are able to handle each other's sin in a spiritually profitable way. You have to look at conflict in an entirely new light, not to win, but to understand. I want you to think of conflict as an exercise in understanding. When conflict arises in your relationships, you have to say, just like somebody going to the gym, I need to get stronger, I need to get leaner, I need to get faster, whatever you're saying. I want to come out of this conflict understanding you more, knowing you better. That's what I'm trying to do. I'm not trying to win, I'm trying to understand. Because if you win a fight, you lose in marriage. Right? If you win a fight, you lose in marriage. Nobody feels closer to you after they've been defeated by you. You don't gain understanding when you convince your spouse that they were all wrong and you don't know why they did what they did. That's why we have to go back to how porcupines mate, all right? It's not easy, but you have to be careful because if you approach a porcupine in the wrong way, I know, poor boy, right? You just want to take him home and take care of him, right? Old world porcupines, not New World, which is our continent, but old world porcupines are actually one of the only animals that are monogamous throughout life. And what happens is they have to lay down their quills flat. And they make themselves vulnerable in a way they would to no one else, just this one mate. No one else gets that proximity to them. And then they're able to do it. And if you want to have that intimacy in your marriage, you have to say, I have to lay those quills down flat. Every one of us, if you know somebody well enough to marry, you know somebody well enough to hurt them. You know what really gets under their skin. You know what makes them feel disrespected. You know what makes them feel diminished. Because we know them so well, we can just wound each other. But those wounds aren't for each other. The quills aren't to push a spouse away. Never treat your wives harshly, Paul says. We have to lay them down flat. We make ourselves vulnerable. And in humility and gentleness and patience, we finally are able to relate and resolve the conflict, because it's not about winning, it's about understanding. And that's where couples go so wrong. We think it's about winning. Lisa and I have had an ongoing conflict with the state of Texas for like 5 or 6 years. We had a corporation in the Northwest, in the Seattle area, and we're trying to get everything moved to Texas. And we kept hearing, well, you can't do that because you're a foreign corporation. So we're not a foreign corporation. We're incorporated in the state of Washington. And finally it said, yes, exactly. See, to the state of Texas, it doesn't matter if you started your company in Ireland or Sri Lanka or Seattle. If it's not incorporated in Texas, it's a foreign corporation. That's just a Texas way of looking at things, right? We get that now, but we didn't when we were first here. And couples often fight over words like that because they're seeking to win, not to understand. I have a friend, very wealthy, successful athlete. He has succeeded far beyond what he could have dreamed when he was in college. They've had a lot of money, and so they realized they could build their dream home. They had a nice home. They had young kids. We're going to build our dream home. And so his wife was looking around because he's off earning the money, competing in his sport, and she thought she found the perfect place, and she was so excited, and she built it up, and she took him to see it. He hated it. He hated it so much he was offended that she showed it to him. He said, Gary, it was the biggest fight of our married lives. You think a lot of times you fight because you don't have enough money? They weren't going to spend hundreds of thousands. They weren't going to spend $1 million. They were going to spend millions of dollars. And it was the biggest fight of their life. How could you say that you know I wouldn't like? And they're going back for several days until finally he said something that clicked. She goes, wait a minute. You hate the house. Of course I hate the house. He goes, I don't like the house either. Then why do you want to buy it? We're going to tear down the house. I like the property. He goes, oh. Well, yeah, it is a great place for the kids. That's what I was saying. And it's real convenient to the airport. Exactly. I mean, finally they understood. They weren't seeking understanding. They were seeking who's going to win and who's going to lose. And everything changed. That's why you have to keep reminding yourself. We have to have the opposite attitude of my friend Wayne Stewart's kids. He's got 2 kids at the time. They were 6. Lauren was his daughter, and he had Jacob, who was 4. And he had taught him how to pray. And he said, you could pray out loud anytime. You should pray for your family. And one time he's driving in the car, little Jacob's in the back, and he heard Jacob start to pray. And he felt so proud as a dad. My son's praying. He's only 4. He heard him praying for his sister. This is just incredible. Until he clued in, and he heard Jacob say, and dear Jesus, please put Lauren in a cage. We do that when we get in fights, don't we? Don't ask Jesus to put your spouse or your boss or your roommate in a cage. Say, Lord, if I'm going to get out of this, I need you to cage my pride. I need you to cage my harshness. I need you to cage my impatience or my demand that just because I want it this way, it has to be done that way. That's what needs to be caged, because conflict will be inevitable. I know some of you think if you find the best romantic partner, you won't have any conflict. You're just sadly mistaken. Look, I would say about a third of the women that I work with premarital counseling have what Prepared and Rich test calls idealistic distortion. That means you have a wildly rosy view of how good marriage is going to be. And you got to undercut that, or they're going to freak out when they get into a real marriage, and things are a lot more difficult than they think. In fact, here's one of the questions from that test. Let me put it up. This is an actual question. You score it 1 to 5. 1 totally disagree, 1 kind of agree, 5 totally agree. I believe I will never be disappointed in or frustrated by my partner. I've had women answer 5, completely agree. They will never be disappointed. They will never be frustrated in this amazing man who's put a ring on their finger. How many of you have been married or are married? Would you please raise your hand? Women, up high. If you have been married or are married, keep them up, keep them up. How many of you have never been frustrated and never disappointed in your husband? Keep your hands up. All right, singles, please look around. All right. We were at the end of this. We had already gone over an hour. We had to wrap it up. And when you're counseling, you're supposed to use Socratic, asking questions, getting them to come to the conclusion. I just had to jump ahead, and I just looked at her and I said, I'm sorry. You're just wrong. You just are. He's going to disappoint you. We got to prepare for that. But here's the thing. When you learn to do it in a positive way, it does a good thing because it reveals your values. It tells you what you fear. It tells you what you hope for. It helps you understand each other, but it never ends. It's not that with a good marriage conflict, it doesn't. Because life changes. I said this in the Lifelong Marriage Conference, but most of you weren't there. When Lisa and I became empty nesters, she started traveling with me. When the kids were young, maybe she'd travel with me 5 or 10% of the time. Not that much because she was home with the kids. Now, she's probably with me 80, 85% of the time, which I love. But it amazed me how things had to change because now that we're traveling together, Lisa's the extroverted one. She's focusing on all the conversations, the new best friends forever that she's made and all that's happened. So she's just talking. She knows I pay attention to where the room is and where the car was parked. And we could be at a hotel for a couple nights, and I would think, because it was uncanny being a Texas gentleman, right? I let her go out of the elevator first, and you'd think half the time she would just guess to go the right way, right? She always goes the wrong way. I mean, it's just amazing. And so we'd been at this hotel for a couple times, and I thought, this is just crazy, because she goes right. And so I'm just like, really? Didn't help resolve the conflict, all right? Was not humble, was not gentle. That's not gonna work. So the next time she did it, I thought, okay, you know what? Last time I said something, I got in trouble. I'm just gonna be silent. So I just stayed where I was and let her walk ahead 25 to 30 yards. She turned around and saw I wasn't with her. That didn't work either, all right? That did not make us feel close to each other. And so I tried to make her the problem. Honey, obviously I can't win. If I say something, it makes you feel stupid. If I don't say anything, it makes you feel angry. Obviously, I'm in an impossible situation. And Lisa looks at me, she goes, Gary, it's so easy. It's so easy. Just look at me and say, this way, hun, in exactly that tone. This way, hun. And we'll both be so happy, all right? I got to try it out on the next trip. It's just amazing. She goes right, it's supposed to go out, go, this way, hun. She turns around, she gives me this gorgeous smile, and we laugh about it, and we go back to the room. And so now we figured out, this draws us together. It's a happy memory in our marriage instead of a continual thing that's gradually pulling us apart. You can't have a marriage without conflict, but you can have a marriage where conflict helps you become closer together. That's the goal. And Paul says the way we do it is to go back to who God created us to be. People who are humble, people who are gentle, people who are patient, people who bear with one another, and who make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. This is a life that's worthy of our calling.